Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're super excited that each of you have joined us today. My name is Angelique Chappelle. I am a program manager here at Elastic, and we are absolutely thrilled for this conversation today. A few uh, housekeeping notes here. What we're going to ask you to do today is you can at any time drop questions in the chat, but we will let our guest get through his presentation first, and then we will have some Q&A, and we've saved lots of time for us to have the Q&A discussion and to get into the dialogue. So don't be shy about adding your questions there. And so let me go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Will Scott is an award-winning software architect, artificial intelligence researcher, design thinker, a frequent speaker, and an IBM Master Inventor. Across the past 2 decades with IBM, Will has led technical teams in product development for IBM storage systems. He's architected novel solutions for IBM research, which leverages deep learning and AI. And in his current role, Will serves as a technical leader within the IBM design team to ensure that the company's software products deliver accessible and inclusive experiences. Will draws from a wide breadth of cross-domain knowledge and is very active in the patent space. Will is also a National Academy of Engineering, or NAE, Frontiers of Engineering alum, and he's led the delivery of technologies that have been recognized by Forbes, MIT Technology Review, and the United States Federal Communications Commission. Last year, in celebration of National Inventors Day, IBM did a spotlight on Will and highlighting the impact that he's making in the world of data and AI. And one of the things that Will shared that he's inspired by, he noted that he's inspired by learning models attempting to emulate the human brain, and he prioritizes developing technologies that deliver inclusive, accessible experiences. His most notable invention, an approach for real-time on-demand auction-based content clarification, discloses a system for dynamic content simplification to help individuals with diverse cognitive abilities. For his advice to those who are passionate about data and data science, his advice is to tinker with new frameworks to invest in your own self-development. So with that in mind, I will like to formally invite to the stage Dr. Will Scott, and let you take it away, and you can share your presentation.
Awesome. So thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you so much for that awesome introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and bring up my slide deck here. Okay, it says I cannot share while another person is sharing. So let's try that again. Okay. Oh, one moment. This is the one thing we should have did before, which was share my screen. Okay. But we all are technologists here, and we know how things work. So we will be mindful and patient.
And if you need me to share from my screen, I have your slides up as well.
You might have to rejoin. Looks like you had to rejoin.
Oh, okay. So just a moment. This is the natural way of life, right? This is the awesomeness about technology, is that we both get to create it, experience it, and then we get to pivot when things kind of check out on us. So no worries. Yes, definitely, Javier. Tech is great until it fails. So it definitely happens.
Okay, I apologize for that. Zoom kicked me out of the meeting, which I did not anticipate. But let's try that again. Let's try that again.
Okay, very good.
All right, now you should see my screen. I hope you guys didn't freak out too much when I got kicked out. I was definitely coming back, right?
We knew
So I'm going to
that.
go ahead and and share my screen here. So this is the wonderful thing about dealing with folks in tech. They understand what can go wrong sometimes does. So it happens even with the best of us. So first, let's try that again. First, I want to thank everyone. Thank Elastic for having me here today. It's particular the Blasticians ERG for putting all this together, doing all the setup behind the scenes. As you all would probably know, there's a lot of work that goes into not only setting up something like this, but all of the other events that folks have going on. And I'm just super happy to be here and looking forward to having a lot of fun today. So I'll talk a little bit about what the kind of layout and agenda, if you will, of the talk will be. Basically, I'll share a little bit about my journey in tech over the last 20 years. Then I'll get into some interesting insights that surfaced from a research study that I led in IBM, focusing on Black talent in the design organization. I think it'll be super relevant to today's talk, and hopefully some great insights will come out of that. And also, as Angelique mentioned, for the remaining time, we'll do kind of an open style Q&A, kind of open discussion, have plenty of time for that and get to more kind of, formal chat here. So with that, I'll start by introducing myself. I had a great introduction from Angelique, but I'll give you make this brief and point out a couple of things that are really interesting. So many moons ago, went to PWI, primarily white institution of LSU, graduated, PhD from there. My doctorate was in the field of autonomic computing. Folks will commonly call that artificial intelligence by today's language. Basically, my work was around a facial recognition technique that used image transform coefficients as features. So started in the AI space, way back. Then I was interning with IBM during my grad school time. Ultimately, signed on full time with them. Started on the West Coast. I see some West Coast folks there. I was outside of San Jose at the time. Did a bunch of development roles, but ultimately moved into software architecture. Now that was kind of a departure from just pure development, that I started focusing more on technical leadership, really driving the technical direction of organizations that I participated in. And the biggest shift was my move into the research organization. So great thing about this, I was able to kind of bring things full circle. So at that time, when I moved into research, there was a growing adoption and investment in cloud. Also, IBM was focusing and really investing in Watson. And there's also a great push to leverage AI in a number of spaces. So the area of research that I focused on, the research organization I was in, was accessibility research. And for folks that are not familiar with that domain or space, basically accessibility is about making products and user experiences inclusive and accessible to folks, no matter what their capability level is. So I was able in research to, and with the timing and the place that I found myself, kind of combine two areas of interest, which was kind of the accessibility space and AI. And then that led to some really great outcomes. A couple of things that mentioned was, patents around content simplification to enable individuals with cognitive disabilities to better understand content in context. Another interesting patent was around improving the accuracy rates of speech to text recognition systems, which had, of course, application to folks that are hard of hearing or profoundly deaf, but also beneficial for the general population. So I did a lot of stuff in that space. And also, while all of that was going on all this time, I was involved in the diversity recruiting space. So I'd recruit at HBCUs, historically black colleges, universities, but also PWIs. I'd traveled to a number looking for diverse talent in those locations. So with all of this happening and with this confluence of my interest in accessibility and my background in AI and delivering these patents, I ultimately became a master inventor. So for those not familiar with this title outside of IBM, basically what it means is you have to deliver a number of patents that have a certain portfolio value there's a review board that goes through and looks through all of this stuff. You have to do some guidance and help other people deliver patents. You have to be on review boards to review patents yourself. And ultimately, you go through all this stuff, then they say, okay, you're a master inventor. But what it really means is you've delivered some great impact to the business and you're recognized for it. And from the last numbers I heard, there's like something like 2% of the company that have that designation. So I'm gonna point out one cool thing here. This one really stood out to me because this was the recognition that Angelique mentioned about FCC. So FCC has an award they offer it annually. It's called the Advancements in Accessibility. So basically, what government does is they look for some really cutting edge technologies that are moving the state of the art forward in accessibility. And IBM had never won that award before. Some other companies, big names you'd be familiar with, Microsoft, Google, they had won it, but IBM had never won that before. So based on the work I did that started with some of my patents and some delivery work that I did, IBM ultimately won that award. So it's a really, really cool thing. So I'm going to tell you something kind of interesting about this image. I don't know if you can see it, but at the bottom right down there, you might be able to see there's this big, nice camera. Someone's holding this big, nice camera up there. So somewhere somebody took this amazing photo and I never got that photo. I don't know what happened to it. I never saw it. I ended up with this photo from somebody's cell phone. I'm not salty about that, but I just wanted to call that out. So I had a lot of fun there. So as I mentioned, this work got some good external comms, and IBM highlighted a number of those things. So, but with that, let's change gears a little bit. I'm gonna tell you a story, and then this story is relevant to my talk today. I'm going to get there, so bear with me. I'm going to talk about some current events here in Austin. So I saw some folks are in Texas, so you may be able to feel my pain. I saw some Austin folks joining. So you will know this is very current. So what happened very recently was coined the Arbor-apocalypse. It's a clever word mashup of what happened recently due to some extreme weather conditions here in Austin. So what happened was there was some very cold weather by Austin standards, like upper 20s, low 30s, over a long period of time. And there was, kind of sleeting, misting rain. And what happened is over time, this rain congealed and accumulated on all of these tree branches across the city and the greater metro area and just wreaked all kinds of havoc. The trees then started to break and crack and fall on power lines. So the fallout of that was a bunch of people in the area without power, like 160,000 plus folks per the last numbers I saw, myself included. We were without power, right? So as this is happening, imagine that you're sitting at your house. This is actually happening to us. The power's out and it's late at night and you just hear crack, 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 boom. It's like, oh my God, one of the limbs just fell, just broke. I don't understand what just happened because it's dark outside. You can't see. So you just have to wait till the morning and see what happened. And this is an example of like some of the most, dire fallout from this in terms of the trees. This is an example of a tree that, completely uprooted. It tilted over. The weight of the ice was so heavy that a tree this large was impacted and actually fell over. So what happened there? Basically, the trees were not equipped to deal with that type of extreme weather. They weren't able to handle that. So, it's a really interesting thing that happened in the city. And, as all of this was happening, I guess I started to think about my happy place. Now, it's funny, I saw some other folks that also joined from Hawaii. So, throw up the shocker for my Hawaii folks. Hawaii is probably one of my favorite places. Folks that know me will know this. And, with everything going on, I thought about the warm weather and the beautiful environment and contrast of Hawaii, and also, the palms and the beautiful palm trees swaying by the ocean and all that good stuff, all those places that I wish that I could be as I sat and I sort of was bringing all this stuff together while all of this was happening. And then I started to think about how different, the palm trees were than the my trees, because what was shown on those photos, I suffered some of the same fallout and much folks in my neighborhood. So if you contrast that with a palm tree, so even when palm trees are facing turbulent and adverse conditions, they have the ability to stand strong. Palms are very unique in that sense because, not going into a lot of the detail, but their root system is super strong and the trees themselves are flexible and their roots run really deep, which allows them to withstand those situations. And we all know that they bring just a unique and a certain beauty to the environment. Like that's what I iconically think of when you think of tropical environments, right? So said differently, palm trees are resilient. Now, as I mentioned, as I was thinking about all of this, and I was bringing all of this together as these wintry conditions were happening, as I was literally putting these slides together, I started to draw a metaphoric connection between Black talent in tech and the beautiful palm trees. So they both bring a unique beauty to their environment, and they're both strong and resilient. Now, as I make this comparison, let me be clear for folks that may not share the lived experiences of a Black person in tech. It's not that because of the traumas that they may have faced due to systemic racism that may occur in the workplace and other places that they are resilient. It's because they thrive in spite of it. That's what the real measure of resilience. Now, I'm gonna give you an example. It's a visceral example, but it's a true example. A Black professional in tech could be disoriented and just surprised by reading the news of another Black man getting murdered by a police officer, then have to context switch and go directly into leading a team meeting. I say this, this literally happened to me. That's something for context switching. Another, a Black female that's a Black professional in tech could be preparing to enter into a customer engagement, then have to deal with a microaggression from a colleague asking, "What's up with your hair? What's your hair doing?" Right. So I say all of this because in spite of all of these challenges, in spite of the toll these types of things could have on one's mental health, in spite of these things, Blacks have thrived and continue to thrive in the realm of tech and continue to do so. But of course, there's work to be done. So Blacks are the beautiful palms. Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit again. So in 2020, there was a research, it's much broader than research initiative. There's an initiative that was created in IBM called Racial Equity in Design. Okay, the owner of this initiative is Nigel Prentice, amazing IBMer, program manager, Jessica Tremblay. Definitely check out racialequityindesign.com to learn more about the breadth of this work. I'm going to talk about one particular area of this work that I led, and I'll talk about the outcomes and some of the insights that came from it. So there was a research study that was done to understand the state and the experiences that Black talent in the design organization encountered on a day-to-day basis. And I should mention, I don't know if I mentioned earlier about my transition so the IBM, the accessibility research organization was moved into the design organization. There's a lot of similarity with the desired outcomes from those. So I am in the design organization now as a technologist. So this is how I came to lead this particular initiative, this aspect of the initiative. And one of the work streams of the Racial Equity in Design initiative was called Career Success. I was the first leader of that work stream. That work stream had two objectives. One was to increase representation of Black talent in the design organization. How might we do that? That's the provocation. Second objective was to define a desirable desirable employee experience for Black talent once they got there, so they'd actually stay there. In other words, we wanted to reduce attrition, right? Because if you hire Black talent and they go, then net, what's the net, right? We know the math on that, right? So those were the two main initiatives or main pillars of that work. So I'm going to share a couple themes that came out of some of the research that research insights that we found across our organization that were common from a lot of the stories that we heard. So they kind of rolled up into a couple of areas. Now, having said that, let me say, before I begin, Black people are not a monolith. By extension, the Black experience in tech is not a monolith. So everyone is not the same. What I share here is not the end all be all. And if we call them turbulent conditions, that some people may feel them at less intensity and more so than others, some it may not relate to them at all. These are merely some insights that we found using the sample size and the research methodologies that we employ. So what was one big area? So one big area we found was, there was a lot of feedback that folks weren't truly comfortable being their authentic self at work. Now, what played into that? There were a number of things. One thing that continued to surface and bubble to the top was research showed that representation really mattered. By that, I mean seeing Black folks, Black professionals in roles made a difference. Seeing your peers, but not only peers, seeing members of leadership that were Black professionals made a big difference, because there was that vision. You could see that path of success that someone had already blazed that trail. I too can get there. It was that type of situation. Another thing, and it's goes into some of the considerations that some folks may not consider, but another thing that bubbled to the top was folks felt that they had to continuously be wary of their perceived demeanor. Didn't want to be labeled aggressive or combative or angry, or you don't smile enough and that kind of thing. So they were really processing that all the time. Am I smiling enough? Am I, I don't want to be that person. So those kind of things, in addition to a number of others, surface to the top. So what can organizations do? What can be done about this? Well, first, honestly, it takes a company culture that truly supports this type of diverse representation. There are things like actually showcasing and highlighting the contributions of Black talent and Black professionals in their organization. The importance of things like the Blasticians ERG, defining that sense of community, went a long way. When representation and actually seeing those faces really make a difference, it was really resonated. So, there are any number of ways to tackle things, and I'm not going to say I'm not giving you solutions, because these are big problems. But again, just highlighting some of the common themes that came out of these discussions. So another big one, and this one was super interesting: feeling overworked and underappreciated. Now, this was a common refrain. Now, I'm going to tell you another story. Now, this is not an IBM story. Names have been changed for the purposes of this talk, but basically it goes like this. There was an HR dispute, and this is not an IBM company. There's an HR dispute. There was a white manager, we're going to call her named Jane. There was a Black female employee, we're going to call her Sue. They decided to come to a HR type of mediation because there had been some I won't say problems, but challenges in career progression, perceived recognition, and things of that nature, and just the feeling that Sue was being slighted. The statement came out during the course of that discussion that, I'm basically doing twice the work as my white colleague, but I'm not receiving the same recognition. The manager Jane said, well, unless you cloned yourself, I've seen what Joe is doing, and you're not doing twice the work. I don't see that. Okay, now, sheesh, that's whoo. Why? That's quite the response, right? So I'm going to tell you, that is, Sue's statement about doing twice the work and not receiving the recognition really is a colloquialism. Think of it that way. It's figurative language. Really, what she's saying is that she felt that her contributions lacked visibility, and the notion of meritocracy didn't seem to apply for her. She's in her perspective, she's going above and beyond, but she's not seeing the reward for that. So that's a really tricky one. How might we deal with that situation? So I'm going to talk to this from two perspectives. From organizational, some of the same things apply here. Really looking to highlight the contributions of the diverse talent. Again, that representation thing, I keep going back to it because it was such a strong signal from all of these candidates and research that participated in the study, and it was a pretty large number. But pro strat here, I'm gonna step out of presentation mode and go into lived experience mode. So what I learned, and I found that this has worked for a number of other folks in this situation, is over documentation. If you don't get anything else from this, and this is meaningful from everyone, over documentation of what you're doing. And I'll tell you why. So for people that are highly effective, deliver with great quality, great speed, a lot of times they're builders, they're doers, they're just doing it. And at the end, they're like, I did all of this amazing stuff. I had this great outcome, but what were the steps in there? Like, did I do X, Y, and Z that I was supposed to do and delivered that with great quality? But then I did all this other amazing stuff that was tangential to the work that was done that other folks didn't recognize. If you over document, it can be as simple as, just keeping a detailed list as you're going through the work, what you're doing on the database. So when it comes down to this performance review, when it comes down to the bonus time and all this stuff, you have this super detailed list. So when you're in this situation and you're just like, I feel as if a meritocracy is not holding, we know as professionals in technology, we love data. We love objective, quantitative data. If I can say I did boom, 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 and it was amazing, and someone else did boom, 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 I mean, you do the math there. So that's a pro strat on that. But again, the feeling of being overworked and underappreciated was another very strong signal that came out of that work. Another very interesting signal that came from this research was the feeling of self-doubt due to imposter syndrome. So this is something, and again, I'll step out and I'll go way back to my lived experiences, and I'll bring it current with some of the research that came through. Again, I mentioned I went to LSU PWI institution, permanently white institution, I should say. I was, in most instances, the only Black student in my classes. Graduate, enter corporate America, enterprise, technology space, and IBM. Kind of similar. The mostly the only Black person on my team is very, very rare, right? So, in situations like that, just speaking personally, earlier on, and this probably is most poignant for early stage professionals, but when you're early stage professional and you're in that environment, you're the only one, you may, again, Black folks aren't a monolith, you may start to question, is my voice really valuable here? Why was I hired? Do do I really belong here? Right? It's a tricky thing to address. So as you grow in your career, and again, this can happen to anyone at any time, but as you grow in your career, you find your voice, and then there's all of the greatness that everyone knows that being the only Black person in that room is actually adding so much value to the organization, because one, you can keep the organization out of a lot of trouble, because having that diverse voice, that diverse perspective can keep things from going off the rails many times. And we're not, folks can get canceled these days very quickly for a misstep, right? But also, beyond just having that diverse voice in the room, it is that growing diversity is reflective of the external consumer market, the buying power externally. The world is getting more diverse. So by extension, having diverse talent that reflects the people you're trying to sell to just makes common sense in order to relate and hopefully have shared experiences and better understand the nuance with the demographics you're trying to sell to. So, beyond the creative, non-siloed, non-vacuum, echo chamber approach of not having those voices in the room, we know that there's so many aspects of value that come from that. And I got a reference slide. I may bring it up, but I tried not to show in stats. Like I said, I'm a data guy, I like stats, but there's some interesting stats around that. So if you guys want to see some of that later at the end, I can bring that up. So now I'm going to, quickly bring this to a conclusion here, and then we're going to open it up for general discussion on any of these topics or anything related to this space, AI, or what have you. But a common refrain that we got from Second Pillar. Now, this was a term that was coined by the Racial Equity in Design Initiative, whereby members of the first pillar had lived experiences as blacks in tech. Members of the second pillar didn't share those lived experiences, but they had good intentions toward building diverse and inclusive work environments, right? So the question was, what can I do to help build a more diverse and inclusive environment where Black talent feels comfortable bringing their authentic self to work? So, we had the help of members from Second Pillar working along with this initiative. And I highlighted a couple things that really did help. And I will give you outcomes of this work within and again, certainly not solely as a result of this piece of work, because this is a very broad piece of work, but it was significant for the organization. Within, I think, a year's time, they were able to hire on 42 new hires that were Black professionals in tech, spanning a number of different areas. So to say this was a grassroots approach that kind of started with IBMers for IBMers, and just grew from there, and the outcomes were pretty good in a year's time. So what were some of the things that led to success in the collaboration between first pillar and second pillar? Well, one, what can you do? Well, one, act with true empathy for the lived experience of a Black person in technology. So as I mentioned, I gave you that very visceral example of having hear this mind-blowing, disorienting news, and then having to go in and lead the team meeting. But there's so many instances of things like that occurring, or microaggressions, and it's just being cognizant of those things, having a sense of empathy, and self-checking a little bit. Am I behaving with a level of inherent bias? Maybe it's not to be malicious, but folks have inherent biases. So being aware of those and working to offset those goes a really long way. And as I mentioned, representation is so important. The organizations don't just highlight the significance of Black talent during diversity initiatives and Black History Month. I'm going to say that again. Organizations aren't just highlighting the significance of Black talent during diversity initiatives in February. They're thinking about how they can do so year long. And I'm highlighting here as a sponsor. Now, we know what a mentor is. A mentor is somebody that's stepping with you day to day, helping you through the I'd say, this is my view on the smaller things, and helping you get through those smaller level successes toward a larger success. Now, a sponsor is someone you may not interact with very often. It could be a couple levels of management above you or matrixed adjacent to you that is advocating for you when you're not in the room. Okay, so serving as a sponsor is a significant activity if you're really looking to do something. And then also thinking about hiring in a way that is increasing the diversity of your pipeline. Of course, there are, let's see, how should I say this? There can be cultivated pipelines from certain institutions that companies favor. For example, there's certain colleges that IBM will tend to recruit from, but if you recruit from the same disciplines with the same student body population, with exactly the same, you get a very homogeneous type of talent, right? Think about sourcing Black talent from different and creative ways. So some things that worked really well for this grassroots process, and quickly here, is actually there was a pipeline of actually helping folks get prepared for the interview, understanding what was important in terms of the actual work itself, and having some college students start to dig into those areas of specific work with the specific tools before they even applied, right? So kind of giving away the game, if you will. So one of the things, if you check out Racial Equity Design, the career success thing, there's work that we did, actually I led, around how to prepare for the interview. What are some key things you need to be ready to talk about? What are the tools and experiences you have to have? So it's like, how do you increase that pipeline, that diverse pipeline, to get that representation up, to build that culture, to make people comfortable in their skin as they're working, right? And to increase the overall diversity of your organization, which then drives all those great outcomes that I mentioned. So, as I say, here's those unique lived experiences and that diverse perspective. It's all of those things that make resilience resonate so much with Black professionals in tech. And it's that immense value and that diverse perspective, that diverse voice, that's really adding so much value to your organization. So, that's really what I wanted to share. I could not go into the breadth of that work, but certainly, based on that, I'm going to stop share. Oh, and I will say, I do have a QR code here. If you want to, connect with me later, feel free to scan this guy here. But, if from this point, we want to talk more about any of the things that I cover here, or talk about some other aspects, we can certainly do that. But I'll stop my sharing here. And that's what I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you so much, Will. That was very enlightening. Really appreciate that. I do have some questions that I would like to ask and dig into a few places a bit more, but I also want to encourage everyone, all participants, if you have any questions for Will, please drop them in the chat, and our team will ensure that they get bubbled up so that we can ask those questions. So just to kind of kick things off with the conversation side of things, some of the things that you talked about that I really wanted to dig in a little bit more around. One thing in particular, you talked about around recruitment of diverse candidates. And I loved the point that you made at the end about how we need to pull from diverse pools of people, right? In today's world, we hear a lot in the last few years, a lot about HBCUs. And I know that most people should know by now that means historically Black colleges and universities. One of the things that we often hear a lot about now is like it's a buzzword. Oh, go talk to the HBCUs, which is great, right? But to your point, one of the things that I'm always advocating for, I know you went to the Go Tigers school of LSU, and I attended Auburn University Montgomery campus. So both of us attended PWIs, but then I know like someone like your amazing wife, my sorority sister, Michelle, who's in the chat or in the audience today, she attended an HBCU. How do you approach, like, how would you strategize approaching recruiting at those two types of organizations? Because I think it's important that we don't just show up and say, hey, we're here, and expect to show up the same way in those places and get the best outcomes if, the goal is really to attract.
Yeah. That is a great question, and one that we actually had to tackle with Racial Equity and Design Initiative. So I'll tell you, if the refrain in design is everything is a prototype, and if that is indeed the case, this prototype was successful and maybe scalable and replicable. So one of the areas that we investigated were disciplines that were adjacent to the target discipline. So for example, if there is they're looking for a content designer or something like that, maybe rather than looking for the folks in the discipline of content design, maybe there are adjacent disciplines at the university level that could be trained to move into the, and I'm on the top of my mind, I'm blanking on the actual disciplines and mapping, but the takeaway is, one, don't just silo based on these preconceived notion of only this degree will yield the outcomes we want. What we did, and when I say we, it's the folks at Racial Equity Design and many volunteers, they would actually kind of check in. It's kind of like a buddy system. They had events that were virtual events that were targeted toward diverse populations. And they would just say, come learn about IBM and how we operate. And basically there was like, if you wouldn't mind, we'd like to, keep your information, let you know about opportunities that may come up later. Tell me what your degree is in, what you're pursuing. And then there was some behind the scenes work that kind of went to maps like, okay, disciplines A, B, and C, they're not exactly the discipline we'd previously been recruiting for, but with some training and some ramping up, we can get the talent to exactly where they need to be. So it's like changing the way that recruiting was done at a PWI. For a HBCU, again, representation not only in the organization was important, it's representation for who is out there recruiting, and also the relationships with the staff and faculty on the university. So as you mentioned, HBCUs are being saturated right now. There's so many people reaching out to them. It's like the black talent pot of gold, forgive the facetious language, right? But with that type of saturation and being inundated with folks, have to really have good, strong relationships with people in staff and faculty in the disciplines that you're interested in mining talent. So it's one thing if I just show up on campus like, hi, I'm here at IBM, or it hits way different if I intend to visit the campus, I reach out to a professor or a set of professors in the thing, I have a call with them, I let them know that IBM is looking for them as to grow our talent pool. The staff and faculty reflect that message and amplify that message with the students themselves. So they've like warmed them up to the presence of a recruitment initiative from IBM. So there's different things, but the key takeaways are building true relationships with HBCUs without the kind of oversaturated performative, I'm going there, but having a consistent pipeline. And then also with external talent that may be from PWIs or HBCUs to look for adjacent disciplines that can be trained up to meet, and it's not a lowering of the bar by any means. It's looking at the skill set and upskilling to ensure that in coming from an adjacent discipline, they're ready to meet the rigors of the work environment, and you're giving them the tools and advice and experience before they even start, so they're ready to go quickly. So hopefully that answers a little bit.
That helps tremendously. Like you said, there's such a focus around supporting HBCUs, and that's great. But what you find, I think it's in general, within Black communities, relationships are important, right, to our community. And it may not be the case for other ethnicities or other like groups that are traditionally marginalized, but within Black communities, trust is very important. And I've seen where sometimes that, if you show up and it's like, hey, we've arrived, it can come across as a little disingenuous. On the PWI side, I would say sometimes I feel that because people are hyper-focused on HBCUs now, that they often forget that the majority of Black students actually attend PWIs. Most Black students can't even afford to attend an HBCU. And so we can't forget about this segment of potential talent. And I think it's an important point to highlight. It's an important conversation to have, because we can't promote and celebrate awesome people like you and many, many others, Black people in tech, if we can't get them in the door first, right? And I know I sit in spaces in groups where it's like, well, how do I even get into tech? And I think that's an important conversation that as folks strategize, they have to consider that. I want to pivot into a conversation more like, once you're in your career, you talked about things like having sponsors and mentors and how, you've been able to participate in different projects. I really want to I have a couple more questions that I want to ask, and then I want to get into the questions from the audience. I know we have blocked this time though for just another 10 minutes. Do you have the flexibility to go over a little bit if we need to?
Oh, I'm fine.
Okay, great. Awesome. So as I said, wanting to pivot a little bit, once you're in your career, a lot of times what we see is, and you noted this in your talk, about how you could attract the talent, you can bring in Black employees, but oftentimes, there's a really high attrition. And a lot of times it's because of the things that you highlighted from the research that y'all did around folks not feeling comfortable, people not believing that they can show up to work and be their authentic selves. It's wonderful here at Elastic. We have one of our Elastic core principles is as you are. And that's something that I believe the company does a great job of giving people space to lean into. But even in an organization like this, right, you're always going to have those individuals that, are going to exhibit microaggressions and, have those commentaries. Like you gave a perfect example about how many times have Black women, our hair is commented on. I mean, there are literal laws that they're making, the Crown Act laws that will have made it illegal to discriminate against Black women because of our hair, right? And so those things come up so often, even in spaces where we even feel like there's a measure of protection. But so here's my question in all of that is, because there's so much attrition within tech, and a lot of times people don't stay as long, and I'm speaking specifically about Black people, I feel like sometimes what we don't see enough of are Black people represented in leadership spaces. So senior leadership, executive leadership, you can have diversity around the company, but it doesn't trickle up to, the offices where people are making those decisions. And I'd love to hear your thoughts around that and what you believe that we can do better, be more cognizant to help not just each other as Black people, but also our allies, what they can do to help get Black people promoted and advocate and be sponsors.
So you just laid it out. That was a great question. So it's also a big question, and I'll answer it like this. And this is where a company culture that, and I kind of said it and glossed over it, but this is where a company culture really comes into play, and the people are the culture. So you have to have one buy-in from senior leadership that's really willing to look for that diverse talent that it's already exists in the organization and really highlight their work, and then put and promote them to these places of leadership that they certainly can perform and succeed and thrive in. Now, how does that work practically? There's so many ways to tackle it, but one of the things that I will say the design organization did, that they had a two-tier approach. So the first tier was for early professional hires, and the second tier was for senior leadership, basically like executive level. And basically they were assigning mentors and sponsors for the early professional hires to get them onboarded, get them comfortable with their environment, get some successes under their belt. But after folks have been with the organization for a while, senior leaders, they're looking to get to that next level of leadership. So you need that sponsor, and at the senior leadership level, you need some very senior level sponsors. That gets back to that buy-in, right? So you need that maybe C-suite or just below those advocating for you in the room. Now, I would say, with every company, every organization, there's different challenges. IBM is a super big company. So, there are a lot of folks that are involved in those decisions, and there's quite a bit of discussion and the word comes to mind in negotiation. Let's just go with that around how these decisions are made. But again, every organization is different, right? But it starts with that buy-in. It starts with that company culture and that buy-in, true buy-in from executives, where they literally put their money where the mouth is. So that's where it starts and ends. So
great, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so last one of my questions for now, and then we'll pivot into some of the questions that the audience members have raised. One thing that I wanted to really hear a little bit more from you on is around how do we responsibly use and advance, and in your world, obviously, create technology that doesn't further harm traditionally marginalized people like Black people. And I know that you gave an example about, something with technology around the auditory abilities or the folks who are more able challenged. And I think that was an important example. I know sometimes we've talked about, or things that I've read around technology is even with facial recognition, right? And how even that can be an unforgotten area for people that are designing the technology to consider, that if you're constantly testing with, predominantly white testing groups, and you don't account for the difference in melanin and things like that with people, how that can create inherent discrimination in the use of technology. So using that as an example, those things as examples, would love to know, how do you encourage, or what recommendations do you have for people in tech that are designing the technology to ensure that they're accounting for diverse people groups who will ultimately use the technology?
Right. So another great question. This falls under the domain of AI's fairness and bias. There's a lot of work, and I've been very close to this space around not only diversity, minorities, also accessibility, things like ensuring that autonomous vehicles won't hit somebody in a wheelchair as they're passing through an intersection because it doesn't recognize a wheelchair. But there are two components to this larger question that you raised, which basically the integrity of the training data, and then there's explainability of the model. So integrity of the training data. So for those skilled in the art and working in this space, you know that data is really important when it comes to the outcomes that these AI models produce. So if you have a very homogeneous training data set, if you're trying to do prediction or make decisions based on these models downstream, if the AI models haven't been trained or haven't been significantly diversified in terms of their training data, it just is impossible to make sound, diverse decisions downstream because it doesn't know. So to your example, if there is a facial recognition system, and actually I mentioned that literally that this was a part of my dissertation over 20 years ago, facial recognition. If the training data set of faces that you're using has no Black people in it to give the complete worst extreme, and then you're trying to do recognition of Black faces later, it's just not going to work, right? We know it's not going to work. So we have to think onset about representation. Again, getting back to this different type of representation, but representation in the data sets. We need to make sure that there isn't inherent bias by the people that are training the models, because there's something called supervised learning. And without going into a lot of details about specifics of AI, basically supervised learning says, let's say there's a label, there's some classification. Just say I'm holding an apple, all right, virtually holding an apple. Supervised learning says gets a human that tells the model, when you see what he's holding, you call that an apple. So the algorithm knows it's an apple, right? So if I'm saying that this is a rotten apple as the supervised trainer, whenever it sees that, it's going to say it's a rotten apple, right? Or whenever it sees a Black individual walking in a mall situation holding a bag, that could be potentially targeted as a shoplifter or something terrible, right? I'm just showing. So you have to be careful about bias and representation and how the training happens. And the second piece of that is explainability of the models. Now, this is where folks skilled in art are gonna know and really feel me on this. Is there's some interesting things, and at the very lowest levels, we know that there's a confidence to what these models are producing. Like they're saying if you get 90+% accuracy, that's really, really great in most use cases. But there's that gray area where a lot of times even the most skilled data scientist and person in the AI field doesn't exactly know why that decision was made. It's a little bit it's a kind of uncomfortable thing to think about. So we need to be able, and there's a whole field of research around explaining these models. Why are they making the decisions they're making? So if we understand that, we can, in theory, prevent them from making terrible decisions where 90% of the time it works great, or just say 97% of the times it works great, but that 3% of the time it doesn't work great. Well, it's resulting in, again, someone getting flagged as a shoplifter when they were just walking and minding their business, right? So this 3% or 1% even can be super detrimental. So you have to really work on understandability of these models and explainability in a way that can be peer reviewed, and widely shared. And I will also acknowledge sometimes this is a competing model with enterprise because there are some industry secrets, right, that people don't want to divulge. So it's a very, very tricky question. But those are some considerations there.
Awesome. That was great. All right. So I want to jump to some of the questions in the chat. This looks maybe like 3 or 4 here. And then I have a final one that, so folks who have to drop, we totally understand that. We're going to continue in the conversation just a wee bit longer, and then just know that we will upload this to the Elastic YouTube channel so that you can see the rest of this conversation. Thanks for joining everyone who has. So one question that we have here in the chat is, are there any companies that were a special pleasure to work with? If so, what made them such a pleasure?
So I am a unique unicorn in the tech space these days. I've been with IBM for a little over 20 years. So I've seen multiple roles, multiple takes, looks of the company. I've stayed with IBM. So I've, of course, worked with external companies as collaborator and partnering. but I've been with IBM. Now I can say I've loved working with, and the thing is, it's like, it's cooperation and level of competition, especially in the AI space, because like, you're one company's doing something, it's like, okay, they're adding value. How can we add value, but then take it the next step further? So there's the common companies you'll be familiar with. We cooperate with them, we compete with them. Your Microsofts, your Googles, you know those. But I've been with IBM for over 20 years. So I'm unique in that sense, I think, by today's standards.
Okay, sounds good. So how has your work and research been extended outside of the US? And if so, did you see any significant variances in the data?
Okay, so one of the areas that one of the patents that I worked on around cognitive accessibility was expanded to the EU with a research initiative called Easy Reading. I'm not going to go in a lot of detail about this for interest of time, but basically they were building a dashboard, if you will, that had multiple transformations of content that would allow folks to interact with the web browser and do a bunch of manipulations in context to make it more accessible for them, in particular for cognitive accessibility, simplifying content and things of that nature. One of the biggest things that we found is, if you want to do trials and studies, the approaches there, especially with GDPR, and you'll have to forgive me, I forget what the acronym stands for, but they're really EU-based security protocols around how data is used and maintained, and who's the brokers in that piece. There's actually quite a bit more, I'll say, progressive legislation in the EU around how data is handled, in particular how it's used for collected and used in models. But I'd say that's the biggest difference. Domestically, folks are still, just trying to. I'd say I'd say this is the other thing that I've noticed. There's a sense of a data monopoly that's somewhat growing. So, data is so powerful because then you can run these great algorithms on them and you can derive all these great insights. And then there are some initiatives in EU that are looking to consolidate and kind of open source some of these data sets to kind of share out that wealth. Whereas kind of domestically, it's again kind of held a little closer to the vest in terms of the enterprise. So those are some deltas and differences that I've observed, and those probably being the most key.
Got it. Very good. Thank you. Another question that we got is, can you recommend any books, podcasts, or blogs worth reading or listening to, or share with us maybe what you're currently reading or listening to these days?
So yeah, I can definitely give you a podcast, and I kind of glossed over it. So and it's really relevant to the Black experience in enterprise, Black tech, and it's kind of firsthand accounts of lived experiences, lessons learned. So racial equity in design, one of the work stream was to create a podcast, and I think they're up to like 15 or so episodes, and it's hosted by Nigel Prentice, and it's a deep dive in each of those podcasts around those areas that I mentioned earlier. I would definitely suggest you go and check that out. And again, it's kind of these things that are kind of transcend the actual organization or business unit you're working in. It's kind of like the Black experience. That's probably the top of mind right now that I'd recommend the most. That's most pertinent to this call. I'll tell you, I also read a lot of tech journals, which aren't as interesting. I think probably, and folks may already check this out. I just kind of casually, I like MIT Tech Review. This is a lot of times there's kind of fluff-based reviews that don't really give insights and really stay current. But that one I found is really good one. So of course I would recommend them. But those are the two that, just off the top of my mind, I've been recently looking at. So I'd say those two.
Awesome. Very good. So there was a question about where could you find the podcast. I did find the link to the page, Chris, and you should be able to find those details there. In our last few minutes here, I want to talk to you a little bit about, or at least get your thoughts around some of the burning topics within AI. And
Mhm.
obviously, Chat GPT has been blowing up the interwebs, a lot lately. Would love to get your impressions, your thoughts. Where do you see, I'd love to hear your thoughts around Chat GPT specifically, but I'd also love to know, just in your mind as a designer, as a software architect, where do you see AI going? What's the next big move of AI in your opinion?
So I'll say so. Yes, I've been talking. I've been talking to a lot of folks about this, and I will say one. I love the pervasive nature of it. I love to see this evolution in terms of adoption of AI. Now, on the other hand, I don't want to be alarmist here, but knowing so much about the space, on the other hand, like there are a few concerns that I have. One, things that do concern me, the proliferation of inaccurate, rather, data. So right now, again, it goes back to what I was saying. A good model, in many instances, historically, has 90 plus 95% accuracy. That's amazing, right? In most use cases, that's fine. But when you come to a search engine that you're assigning a level of trust in, that it is some type of canon source for ground truth, then that becomes problematic when 5% of the time it can go off the rails and gives inaccurate information. So I know that there's quite a bit of work that's going to have to be done in this space. I am really interested and excited to see how this progresses, because that's a hard problem. Because usually what's been done before is accounting for a bunch of edge conditions and boundary conditions, like, okay, the model is going to behave this way. If I see it's about to say something weird, I'm going to cut that off boundary. But I mean, with so many edges, if you will, it's very difficult to account for that. And another thing that I can foresee is, how this could be used maliciously for fraud and spam based content. Like you imagine, these spam bots and whatever that are trying to reach out to elderly to, steal their savings. Now you're having these intelligent bots that can interact, remember state, and somewhat articulate intelligently, that become much more convincing to someone doesn't have a discriminating eye. So those are the types of things that concern me. Now, I started by saying I love to see it advance, because when I was started, like we were working on like local machines with hardly any compute power, and now they're doing all this amazing thing. So I love it. In terms of where I think AI is going to go, it's the extreme kind of personalization space. It's like, so right now it's a bot that you're interacting with that can answer questions or whatever. 10 years from now, if there's access, governed access, hopefully, and there's some safeguards around it, to other aspects of your life, this bot is a merging of, your this is just called them series, or your Google versions, or your echoes, that not only has this wide, broad database of external context, it knows you personally. It knows your habits. It knows your schedules. Right. So it's this weird merging of a buddy that knows you, and that can help you, hopefully then add value, and not do anything that's contrary to that. So I can definitely see where that could be the trend in the future. But it's going to take some time to get there. And again, there's a level of trust that people have to have in these models to have that type of purview into their lives. And also that gets back to the other topic of these data monopolies, where these models are held close to the vest, that certain companies will be better at delivering a buddy that knows you than another company that may not. So it's broad area.
Wow, very insightful. Thank you. Um, I think we have one last question in the chat. Who do you pay attention to in tech in terms of individuals or companies or any technology trends? I think that's it.
I don't know if my wife is still on the call now, but she'll smile at this. I literally pay attention to everything. Like I read a lot. Like tons of articles, research papers. Like that's just kind of my thing. So I just like and as that kind of goes to my nature as a master inventor. Like I like to have a broad purview. And with that, I can draw connections and I can see future direction and things of that nature. So I pay attention to everything. Of course, you cannot not pay attention to Elon Musk because he's everywhere, right? Right. But certainly, Microsoft's leadership has done some really great things as well over the last decade in terms of kind of shifting their model of kind of a closed system to more open type approach, and it's done very, very well for them. All the major players, I just like to know big and small. So I'm already reading some articles, so it's hard to answer that one succinctly.
Who do you think we may not know that we should know and we should be following and listening and reading their content or listening to their content?
Who should you be following? Oh, now that's a tricky one. So I'd say it'd have to be a voice that is not getting the recognition that I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that one.
Okay, it's okay.
You stomped me. Like who do I listen to that most folks probably won't? So I don't know. Okay. I'll answer this one in a roundabout way that's not a direct answer, but it's something that I do, so it's meaningful. So, you may have a certain view or belief or perspective, either politically or otherwise. And, what has happened over the last 15 years with the rise of social, sometimes folks enter in like a vacuum, a closed loop of information based on what they always hear. So one thing that I like to do, and I'm not going to call any names or whatever, in terms of channels, whatever, I like to not only read a content that aligns with my particular faith or beliefs or political views. I like to read content and things that comes from other perspectives that don't align with mine. And I'll tell you the reason I do this. I want to understand, and it goes back to empathy. I want to understand where they're coming from. I want to understand their lived experiences, their motivations, because at the end of the day, we're all humans, right? And there's that common bond that people kind of lose and start to butt heads when you start to have different views. So I would say the answer to that is something that's an opposing view that you have. Go find some information in the channel and read about their view and just learn about it. It gives you so much context and empathy.
Amen to that. I completely agree. Really appreciate the conversation today. One question that just came to mind, and I know I said that was going to be my last question, but I promise this will be it. And I was reminded when you reminded us that your lovely wife is in the chat. But a question that a lot of times women get, and we don't often hear men being asked to answer this question, is with a family of, it's 5 of y'all, right?
Mm-hmm.
3 kids and you and your
Yep.
wife. How do you maintain being a great husband and dad and also accomplishing the impeccable things that you've been able to accomplish in your career? What advice would you give to people? Because oftentimes this is something that, like I said, people are constantly bombarding women with this question, but I think it's important to raise that for men as well, because I know that, you definitely take that very seriously, your role as family man first. So last question.
Right. So great last question. And I'm gonna give all the benefit and accolades of that outcomes that I've received based on people that came before me, in particular my parents. So how do I do it? Well, I'm a first generation college student. I learned very early on from my mother, my father, that if I wanted to change my situation, change my environment, I needed to do things to align with that vision and that goal. So they instilled in me very early on a work ethic that's translated through my life. So with that level of work ethic, I think I think it starts with passion, right? Because when you're passionate about something, it's not laborious. It doesn't feel like you're it's a struggle. So, I will say, I also have strong feelings around faith, but, I found myself working in areas that I was passionate about. And if I wasn't passionate about, I tried to get into a position that I was passionate about. Then when I'm passionate, and this may sound weird, but if I'm, up at midnight doing something that's interesting to me and I'm solving a problem, it's like it's because that's like I want to see it work. I want the solution. I want the big picture. I want to see these outcomes. So I find the time, and there's all these buzzwords around work-life balance, work-life integration. It's about one, understanding priorities. What's most important. Family is very important. Faith, health is important. All of these things. Of course, your enterprise deliverables and all of these great outcomes are important, but you can't kill yourself. You're not going to be any value to the organization if you're on your last leg, right? So it's having passion, that prioritization, having that background and foundation, your beliefs and faith and all the people that came before you. And then it's just, doing what you do. It's like, I don't think about anything like that. So it's always interesting when I hear something like that. It's like, I just do what I do and I try to deliver an impact. And I want to be happy.
And I'm going to add this so that you don't get in trouble, and also having an amazing partner.
Yeah. High five on virtual double high. All right. Yeah. Yeah. And we just came off Valentine's Day. She knows. Okay. I see my smiling, So definitely that support system, my wife helped me just even, I ran back my talk. The ideas for the talk today is, she's always in my corner. So that's a given. That's a given. So yeah, 100%. I appreciate that.
Listen, y'all, I got to meet Will's wife when I lived in Austin. She's one of my sorority sisters, and I just instantly bonded with her. But when he says that she's always in his corner, like she was the biggest hype woman from him, like literally from the day I met her. And she was shocked that I actually was familiar with some of his work, like around Watson. And I was like, oh yeah, I know about that project, but she really is. And again, Will, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. This has been a fantastic talk today. I wish I could spend another hour with you because it really has been very insightful. On behalf of all the Blasticians, thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing with us your journey. We want to stay connected, and folks really encourage you to connect with Will on LinkedIn, and we will share out this recording via the YouTube channel. So thanks everyone for attending. Again, giving it up for you, Will, and hope everyone has an amazing rest of the day. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.